This deep news story is about Jaime Harrison and the Democratic National Committee. Now, Jaime Harrison is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and their primary job right now is to organize the primaries for the Democratic Party. Now, in a way, President Biden is the boss of Jaime Harrison and the Democratic National Committee. The primaries are supposed to be open so anyone can challenge anyone for the nomination for the presidency on the Democratic side. But it seems to be that the Democratic National Committee, led by Jaime Harrison, is stacking the deck in favor of Joe Biden, making it almost impossible for anyone to challenge Joe Biden for the nomination. So what we're interested in with this particular deep news session is whether Jaime Harrison actually believes that Joe Biden is easily electable in 2024, or if he's just doing what he's supposed to do because his boss, Joe Biden, is telling him what to do. We're interested in whether he actually believes what he's doing, because the issue of age with Joe Biden is really absolutely a central issue, and we're just wondering if it's just something that Jaime Harrison is doing because he has to do it, or if he actually believes it. So let's dive in and see what Jaime Harrison actually thinks about with regard to the electability of Joe Biden. We're also interested in whether he and the Democratic National Committee are worried about a possible challenge with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So that's of interest to us as well. All right, let's go. All right, Aziz, I want to welcome you to our first deep news, and this is being recorded in September. And the session was done in September and is being published in October 2023. And why don't we go directly to what you got for this deep news thing that you'll find out. First, you'll describe your session, and then I'll tell you at the end of it what the target actually was. It'll be real interesting too. So this is the news, but deep, something you never get in the mainstream. So for people that are watching, watch closely. This is interesting. All right. So what do you have? Let's go to your first page. What do you pick up when you're starting off?
All right. So right at the beginning, page 4, the first perceptuals on the first A through D, I'm really just getting an interior of a man-made artificial room. It seems like there's artificial lighting and there's multiple subjects inside. The multiple subjects seem like they're either in formal attire or maybe like a business casual attire. And they're sort of having this focus gathering around one subject who seems to be speaking. So a couple subjects listening to another subject who's speaking. And if we go on to page 5, you can see some of my deductions there, but it just seems like I'm looking at another angle, more close-up of one of the subjects speaking to the other subjects. And page 6, you can see that I've zoomed out of that room and found out that that room is inside of a tall structure. That tall structure is inside of an urban area. And so yeah, that's basically the gist of where this is going on. It just seems like a man-made room inside of an urban area.
Okay. Well, let's then go to your page 7 where you have you focus in on some subjects. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so page 7, that was my first time moving towards the target subject at focus 1. That subject seemed a little stout, a little portly at the midsection as well as around the face. At first glance, I thought it was a light-skinned subject with spectacles, glasses. However, when probing directly on the face, so moving my awareness right to the face, I was able to see that the subject actually had much darker skin, and the hair just seemed a lot shorter, sort of had what I guess I could deduct as an African look. And yeah, that's sort of the image that I ended up going with for the rest of the session, was this darker skinned subject.
Okay, well, what do you get when you go to page 8? Because that's where you start talking about a deep mind probe of this subject. I think you're calling this subject Subject A at this point.
Yeah, so Subject A now, at this point of the deep mind probe, it seemed like he was just sitting in a room, sitting at a desk of some sort, so just sitting at an object and maybe moving some objects around, writing stuff down, something along those lines. But basically, Subject A, inside of his mind, was vastly concerned with complaining. It seemed like, I would say, maybe 80% of his mind was just complaining thoughts, this inner monologue of complaining. But the deep down below all of that, the last 20%, that was focused on basically operating the physical body, dealing with the objects in front of him. The stuff, I guess, writing on the desk is what it sort of looked like to me. But basically the majority of his mind was just wrapped up in this inner monologue of complaining. It seemed like he was in some sort of annoying situation because of something that he blamed another group for. So, yeah.
Okay, so he's disturbed. Okay, let's go to page 9. You have a lot of stuff on page 9. It's a continuation of your deep mind probe. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this basically dives into that complaining inner monologue. It seems like there's this concern that he has, concern 1, we can just call it. So concern 1, it seemed like it was this sort of networked event, or networked worry, I guess to say. There's a group that's separate from him, and this group seems like it is inflamed based on concern 1. And so I deep mind probed 3, I guess, this isn't based on time, so 3 hypothetical situations. You can see I labeled them situation X, Y, and Z. So situation X is a situation where group B is there, which is this multiple subject group, and the subject A is there as well, but concern 1 is not there. I'm not saying this is in the past, assuming that concern 1 happened later, because I have no idea what concern 1 is. I don't know if there was a past that ever existed with these groups and no concern 1, whatever that could be. So this is a hypothetical situation where there's 2 of the actors that he's worried about in this complaining inner monologue, but the third one is gone, which is this concern 1. So in that situation, it seemed like subject A had this slight caring about this group B, but there was this distance between them, and it didn't really seem like there was any friction at all. But the situation Y actually seemed like concern 1 was just there, and that seemed more like the target time, and it was starting this agitation, this volatility within group B, and that was something that subject A wasn't really happy about, but it didn't really seem like he was doing anything actively about it, but that seemed more like what target time was. Now, the future was a future worry, which was situation Z. So again, hypothetical future worry with situation Z. And that was some situation where he just felt like group B was sufficiently volatile to where he had lost control over the situation. He felt overwhelmed by group B, but that's basically the gist of what concern 1 was. It's just this inflammatory something.
Okay, so you have this concern, and in the beginning it looks like there's everything sort of stable. Then it looks like this larger group is worrisome to this subject A, and then in the future, it looks like the larger group is in some sort of tidal wave type of commotion, chaos. Oh, that looks like on your picture here, overwhelming subject A. So, okay, so that's that's the concern 1. So this is one of the concerns that subject A has. All right, well, Aziz, let's go over to page 10 where you have a power scale. Why don't you describe what that's going on with?
Yeah, so the power scale was basically relative to how manageable this concern is, and basically the power differential between, I guess, the management of this concern as well as the actual concern itself and the ability to overwhelm the subject. So the reason why I gave it a 2 was because it just did not seem very manageable at all. It seemed like this was something that would not go away by itself. That's basically the gist of what the 2 means. It's not something that can just disappear all on its own.
But it doesn't mean it's overwhelming at this point, is that right?
No, it does not mean it's overwhelming at this point. It seems like if he ignored it, it's not going away.
I see. Okay, all right, that's interesting. So, but this is for target time. So if you go to the future worry about situation Z, where it did look overwhelming, that's not this power scale. This power scale is for the target time, like right now. Okay, so so let's go to page 11, because page 11 you switch over to a second concern that this subject has. So what did you find? It's a deep mind probe, concern number 2. What's going on there?
Yeah, so concern number 2, it seems like concern number 2 feels like it's pretty far away relative to subject A. But at the same time, it feels like subject A is sort of awash within concern number 2. It's like if concern number 2, I drew it out right here on the page. It's if concern number 2 was a pool of water, subject A is inside, sort of smothered by the pool. I mean, it's all around him. So that's basically the relationship that they have.
All right, well, and let's go to the next page, 12, where you have your power scale. Why don't you describe the power scale for concern 2?
Yeah, so this got a bit more complicated when I was probing, because the data came in a bit more with more detail. I'll say it that way. So basically, it seems like it was a bit of a toss-up, like a coin flip. I gave it a 5 or a 6. I think a 5 is a bit more accurate, but it was basically like a coin flip of how manageable this situation was with concern number 2. Basically meaning that it seems like the subject A had more faith in this sort of conventional methods of just dealing with his concerns, but the concern is sufficiently scary, sufficiently weirds him out to the point where it's that faith that he usually has for the conventional methods of dealing with concerns isn't exactly there. It just seems like it's a bit of a toss-up. He's not entirely sure if things will just be hunky-dory with the usual methods of dealing with things.
Okay, so let's go over now to page 13, where you continue with subject A, but this time looking at any hidden or external influences on the subject's mind relating to the target.
Great. So basically, subject A has this weird relationship with a couple of other actors on page 13. So basically, these external influences, and this sort of seems like the way it was in the past, is that subject A has this relationship with another subject called subject Q. Now, subject Q is not, it doesn't look the same as subject A. Subject Q has lighter skin. Subject Q is part of a whole other group it seems quite distant. And that whole other group is called group L in this case. Now, there's another group, which is population M, because it just seems like they're not as much of an organized group as group L, so I just wanted to call them something different than a group. I wanted to call them a population, so population M. Now, subject A has this, there's sort of a compartmentalized awareness scale going here. So population M is aware of subject A, but they are not aware of subject Q or group L. Subject A is aware of subject Q, but subject A is not aware of group L. Subject Q is aware of everybody, but subject Q is kind of this thumb that sticks out of group L. Subject Q is still a part of group L. It doesn't have this sort of separation that I get the sense between subject A and subject Q, because subject Q is within group L. But at the same time, subject Q is kind of like this public figure that sticks out, that's sort of like this public face of group L. And group L seems kind of like this secret agent vibe. I mean, they seem like really secretive and really behind the scenes from everything. So the idea of population M ever knowing about group L, that's basically non-existent. They don't know about each other at all. So there's this compartmentalization of awareness from population M, I guess, being the lowest level or the least aware, and sort of just goes up from there.
So you basically have two individuals you're talking about now, subject A and subject Q. And subject Q, this is, it's got some type of, it's like a thorn in the side of subject A. And some of the deductions you have are sort of interesting. They might be interesting. That like you have MI6 and secret agent. So something behind the scenes is pressuring subject A. That's what I'm getting from this. And then your groups. Yeah, and then your groups, especially population M, apparently they're just unaware of these pressures that are being applied on subject A.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like population M is just looking at subject A, and subject A kind of just feels like a puppet subject. It doesn't really seem like subject A is this independent being. It seems like subject A is, yeah, it seems like subject A is heavily manipulated by subject Q, and subject Q is not someone that subject A would ever cross or I guess betray or anything like that. It seems like there's this huge gap in power between subject Q and subject A. There's a big gap in power. So where subject Q is the more powerful subject, but subject Q is sort of just, he's also kind of a puppet, but he's not a puppet in the same way that subject A is a puppet, because subject Q is just basically the face of group L. And so subject Q is kind of just, if group L is manipulating subject A, subject Q is the stick that is used to poke subject A. That's basically the relationship. So basically page 14 just compares the past relationship with group L, subject Q, and subject A with the current time, and or not the current time, but the target time. But in the past, it seemed like subject A was really just surrounded by group L, I guess through subject Q, but it seemed like subject A was completely encapsulated by group L. At the target time, though, with this inflammatory situation with concern 1, all that type of stuff, that's the target time probes.
Yeah.
The target time seems like group L has still has a presence, a significant presence in subject A's sphere, but it's sort of stretched out, sort of stretched away from subject A significantly. And the main body, I guess, of group L is elsewhere. But at the same time, it still sort of has a toe dipped in, or like a pizza slice. A significant portion of itself is stretched out and still within the sphere of influence that is subject A, but it's nowhere near what it was like in the past.
Yeah, so in the past it seems like subject A is central to group L, and then now it seems like subject A is more isolated from the main body of group L.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. He's a bit more isolated, but I wouldn't say sort of central, because that sort of implies importance. I would say sort of encapsulated, is because he does have the vibe of being this puppet subject. But yeah, he's just corralled by group L.
Okay, so the past encapsulated, and the current target time a little bit more isolated.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, let's go through the target reveal now and tell you what it was. Ready?
Sure, yeah, I'm excited.
Okay, the general target is the Democratic National Committee as determined by the following focus. And the focus is Yeme Harrison. Focus 1 is Yeme Harrison. Now, he's the chairperson of the Democratic National Committee. And so Yeme Harrison, during the most important meeting to determine the rules governing the 2024 primary season for the U.S. presidential election. So he's the head of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and it's during the most important meeting to determine the rules governing the 2024 primary season for the U.S. presidential election. So subject A is Yeme Harrison. And subjects, and so you have the Democratic National Committee around him, the Democratic Party, and so on. The interesting thing is in 2 days, today is the 12th, in 2 days, apparently the Democratic National Committee is going to meet and decide on some fundamental rules. This is it's going to be September 14th. And what they seem to have done already is to say they've basically banned people from campaigning in Iowa and New Hampshire. saying that if they can't, they want to shift the focus to South Carolina and Georgia and places like that. So President Biden lost he lost New Hampshire. He was like fourth in New Hampshire. He didn't do too well in Iowa either. So they want to shift it to a place where he did do well, and that'll be the first. But Iowa and New Hampshire historically have always been the first. So now they're apparently saying that any votes that are cast for other candidates in Iowa and New Hampshire go to President Biden. That's sort of weird. But now in 2 days, they're going to be voting on new rules where they're saying that if somebody has actually campaigned in New Hampshire, then their votes in Georgia, and you can't win the Democratic nomination without Georgia, the votes in Georgia will go to President Biden. So if they campaign, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is making a big thing about that right this very moment. He's saying that now if you add up everything, the only way somebody can win the Democratic nomination is by winning 80% of all states. That means President Biden can win only 20. If President Biden won only 20% or 21%, then he'd still get the nomination. So you have to add the superdelegates. There's two groups of superdelegates that are assigned by the Democratic National Committee it'll be to President Biden. And then you take all the other delegates, like in Georgia, and if Robert F. Kennedy campaigns in New Hampshire, all those votes in Georgia for him go to President Biden instead. That's the rule that they're debating, and they're going to apparently try to pass on September 14th, which is in 2 days. So that's the sort of the struggle. Now you have two concerns. Concern one is President Biden's electability. So apparently Jaime Harris, the chairperson of the Democratic National Committee, according to your results, is extremely worried about President Biden's electability. So it's not like he's ignoring the whole thing. And you're concerned about concern one, where you have the idea that this population is going to be, in the future, could overwhelm Jaime Harris, and like that seems like it could actually happen. And then your concern number two is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the current time. So it's interesting. His concern number one is the electability of President Biden, and his concern number two is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the current time. So right now they're ignoring Robert F. Kennedy. If you look at CNN, which has become pretty much a mouthpiece for the Democratic National Committee, they don't report on anybody else. For example, you don't see any stories on Robert F. Kennedy, and you don't see any stories on Marianne Williamson, as if they're not running. You don't even see them. You do find Robert F. Kennedy being given good exposure on Fox News, of all things. But Marianne Williamson is getting most of her exposure on TikTok, believe it or not. And she's apparently very popular among that younger age group. And Robert F. Kennedy has got a sort of a classic campaign, but very, very much focused on social media, podcasts, things like that. He's got a big Instagram following and so on. So, but you don't see them in sort of like you don't see them appearing in the mainstream news. So what we're trying to investigate here is, it looks from the mainstream like Robert F. Kennedy is like a non-event, just not even relevant. And we're trying to see if in fact they are worried about him. And it looks from your data that they're very worried about him. He's apparently polling at about 22% of the vote right now. That's at the current time. And President Biden is plummeting in the polls. People thinking he's just too old and feeble to continue running, to run for another term. So that's what the polling data are saying. And the polling data, even on the Democratic side, for example, CNN polling comes up with really, really stark numbers, plummeting for President Biden. People just say he's too old. And it looks like your session picked that up. what we're getting from your session that we don't get from the mainstream news with any polling is the concern about, because they're not focusing on Robert F. Kennedy at all. Apparently, the Democratic National Committee and Yeme Harrison are very deeply worried about Robert F. Kennedy, and that would, if I take your results and I look at what's happening with the rule changes, if you campaign in New Hampshire, then all of your votes go to President Biden in Georgia, which sort of makes no sense. That's really wonky. That would make sense given what you're seeing here. That would make sense. By the way, you picked up completely, when the external influences, you got this subject Q. Subject Q, just looking at your data, that looks like President Biden. He's the guy in charge, and he's the guy sort of controlling Subject A. Subject A is Yeme Harrison. So Subject Q was not part of the target. So I don't know exactly who it is, but based on your description, it really sort of looks like that's President Biden, and he's sort of trying to control what goes on with Subject A. And that's just my guess.
Oh, no, it's a good guess. I mean, if it's not him, it's somebody who's definitely in his corner. I mean, those are really interesting targets. Hey, just for my own peace of mind in terms of my own accuracy at describing faces, can we rewind to my page 7? That was when I first started looking at the subjects that would become Subject A. And at first glance, I thought
he's an African American.
Oh, great! My first glance was oh yeah.
In fact, he's a chubby African American. He has a round face, and so you described them absolutely perfectly.
That's great. All right, that was my big worry for this session was I'm glad that probe on the face ended up being the accurate probe, because that's the one that I went for the rest of the session. So I'm very happy about that. Very cool target all around.
No, you nailed it exactly. In fact, if you look up Yeme Harrison, if you Google Yeme Harrison, you'll see pictures of him, and he sometimes looks like he's shaving his head now. Sometimes he has like very short hair, but he's a chubby African American. Exactly, and you said it. You said he's chubby, sort of round in the face, and an African American.
Yeme Harrison. I googled him just now. It looks like the guy. That's pretty great. I mean, he's a bit more bald than I illustrated, but still, I mean, he's got. That's it. That's great.
But if you click on, when you're Googling it, if you click on images, you'll see a whole bunch of pictures of him, and some of them he has hair, short hair.
That's great. Well, this is fantastic. I appreciate being a part of this session. This was a very exciting session, and as cool as the target was, I gotta say I'm just really happy that I got Yeme Harrison's appearance right for just describing faces and subjects. As the remote viewing aspect of it, I'm very happy to at least be able to get an accurate picture of a subject. So, yeah.
If you're going to look, though, at any type of substantive take-home message, is that the mainstream is totally ignoring Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as if he doesn't exist. And it's clear from this session they're terrified. They're terrified about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's a real thing. They're really worried about him. And so because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the concern number 2, and it's a new threat. You describe this as new, and it seems to be big and scary enough to make Subject A reasonably afraid. So it was and you have him, and on your page 11, you have him like standing. Subject A is standing in a pool of water that's just surrounding him. Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
Anyway, that was a great session. All right, Aziz, thank you so much. That's what we've got for the Democratic National Committee, and it's interesting that this session is taking place 2 days before the meeting, apparently, that the Democratic National Committee is going to be having, led by Yeme Harrison, to decide the rules, the main rules on, and if those rules that I've heard are being suggested pass, talk about fixing an election. That's really something. You know, it's
Yeah.
very interesting. And based on your other data, sort of like worrying about like an overwhelming sort of uproar afterwards, if it looks like the primary elections are being fixed, this reminds me a lot of 1968, because in 1968 you had Hubert Humphrey, who was the vice president for a very unpopular at the time President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and the Hubert Humphrey, when he ran, it was in the context of the Vietnam War that was just going terrible, and so there was a lot of dissent all over, and you had Eugene McCarthy and others, and even later than Robert F. Kennedy, the first, not Jr. And you had just sort of everything sort of happening, and then you had the convention where Hubert Humphrey, sort of the establishment candidate, won the nomination for the Democratic Party in Chicago, and the city basically came apart. There were riots, there was flames, there was everything. It was the most disastrous thing that could happen to start off a campaign. The Chicago basically went up in flames in terms of that political stuff. And the convention for the Democratic National Convention is this time in Chicago. So it looks like a real repeat of 1968. If it looks like they fixed the election, and that was the complaint that was made about Hubert Humphrey in 1968. If it looks like they're fixing the election with regard to Biden, I'm just worried about what kind of disruption might happen. We don't know. Well, we're doing deep news. We may know a little bit in advance of everybody else what's actually going to happen in Chicago. But anyway, that's sort of an interesting parallel. It's like chess pieces are sort of set up. You don't know how the game's going to end, but based on the way they're set up, it looks like sort of some major clashes could occur.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect it. That's fixing. This is pretty blatant. So yeah.
Yeah, you got Jaime Harrison exactly correct, and what looks like President Biden's electability and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., those two concerns and the external influences, and well, we'll wait and see. Thanks so much, Aziz. This was great.
Thanks. This was fun. All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.